What's up guys, welcome back to the channel for another God Guide. Today we're covering Amaterasu, the Shining Light, so let's dive right into it. So as always for these guides, we're going to start with a basic overview of Amaterasu's playstyle, then move into covering her abilities in depth, then looking at what items she makes use of and a full build example, some general tips for using Ama effectively in fights, and finally we'll round it out with a basic overview of some good and bad matchups. Alright, so let's kick it off with the basic overview. So Amaterasu is generally considered a more late game focused pick, mostly due to her insane late game teamfight potential, as her kit generally lends itself to being around multiple enemies or teammates to get the most benefit. While she shines brightest in teamfights, she still has a decent early to mid game as well, though it could be considered on the weaker side compared with most other warriors. This is to compensate for her insane late game teamfight potential. She also has quite a defensive kit involving a lot of team buffs and debuffs and can peel very well, which actually allows her to be flexed into support as well as the obvious solo lane pick. Those are her two main roles, I'd say. I wouldn't really recommend her anywhere else unless you're memeing. Alright, so let's move on to covering Amaterasu's abilities in depth. So starting off with her passive, Illuminating Strikes. Amaterasu's basic attacks apply a debuff to enemies hit. After hitting the same target 3 times with basic attacks, they'll have an aura put on them that increases all damage taken by 10%. This aura lasts 5 seconds and she can have a maximum of 3 of them active at any one time. So this isn't a passive that's like worked into a kit or anything like that, but it is a passive you do need to be paying attention to. Things like making sure you stack this up on at least one of the minions before you go to clear, that'll increase your clear speed a little bit. And naturally this is extremely strong for objective fights as well. Throwing this on a Gold Fury or a Fire Giant will increase your entire team's damage output towards it, allowing you to burn it much faster. It's also important to keep this up on priority targets in teamfights. When you have a mage hitting someone for 1k, having that aura on them increasing it by 100 can be very powerful and the difference between getting a kill or not getting a kill. Alright, moving on to Amaterasu's first ability, Divine Presence. Amaterasu controls one of 2 auras that provide either additional movement speed or additional power to all allies in a 30 unit radius. She can activate Divine Presence to switch between these auras while also healing herself over time and putting the ability on cooldown. So this is definitely an ability a lot of people underrate. A lot of intermediate or beginner level Ama players seem to just use this for the heal and not really pay attention to the aura, which is a huge mistake. The aura can provide up to 25% movement speed, which is more than a pair of boots for your entire team, or up to 35 power. It's worth noting that this passive is better for physical, since it's 35 for both magical and physical, and 35 physical power is usually worth more than 35 magical. So using this ability correctly really involves managing the auras effectively, as much as you can. For example, making sure you keep it on the power aura if you're trying to push towers or do objectives, where the movement speed is less important. And if you're looking to engage or disengage or chase a kill, you might want to use the movement speed aura. It's also worth noting that with full CDR, which you will usually want to get on Amaterasu, this ability only has a 5.4 second cooldown, so you can quite easily manage which aura you need in a teamfight. Alright, sorry if that explanation dragged on a bit, there was a lot to cover with her auras and stuff, but let's move on to her second ability, Heavenly Reflection. Amaterasu begins charging her mirror for 5 seconds. While charging it, she gains up to 15% damage mitigation depending on level, and will charge the mirror by dealing and taking damage. At the end of the 5-second channel, or if she reactivates the ability early, Amaterasu will fire her mirror, dealing a base amount of damage that is increased based on how much charge she had stored while channeling the ability. So this is Amaterasu's main wave clear and poke ability. While this ability seems to deal a fairly small amount of damage, it's very easy to fully charge the mirror in lane, which will double the damage output dealt by the mirror, making her wave clear actually not that bad after the first few levels. It can deal up to 420 base and 60% scaling. It's worth noting of course that the double damage applies to only the base damage and not the scaling. So utilising things like the power aura from Divine Presence and the 10% damage boost from Illuminating Strikes in combination with this, it can actually hit very hard. Most people don't recognise the damage mitigation portion of the ability either. It gives 3 to 15% mitigation depending on the rank of the ability. And since this is the ability you'll level first in basically every game, you can gain a lot of damage mitigation after level 9 or so. This can allow for a lot of aggressive tower dives or provide some defense against a gank, something like that. Make sure you make use of this and don't necessarily fire the mirror as soon as you can every time. Alright, moving on to a more simple ability. Amaterasu's Glorious Charge is just a simple line dash that will damage and silence any enemies hit. The damage on the dash is actually fairly high. The scaling isn't great, but the base damage goes as high as 310 by late game. Also, the dash doesn't actually silence enemies hit necessarily. It will actually create a silence field in the direction you are dashing as you hit someone, so if there are people lined up in a big line, you can actually silence multiple people with this. The cooldown on this dash is at 18 seconds flat, so even with full CDR, it's still quite a long wait between uses, so you might want to make sure you're playing around that and not wasting this dash necessarily should you risk getting caught out. And finally, let's cover Amaterasu's ultimate, Dazzling Offensive. Amaterasu strikes 3 times in a large AoE cone in front of her with a small delay between each strike. The first strike deals 100% base damage, the second deals 120% and slows for 2 seconds, and the final strike deals 140% base damage and stuns for 2 seconds. So this is really what makes Amaterasu such a monster in late game teamfights. Yeah, the auras and the passive are really nice, but being able to AoE stun for 2 seconds is really insane for teamfighting. If an enemy gets hit by this and they don't have beads, they're literally just dead. It's as simple as that. It also does pretty respectable damage if you hit all 3 swings, doing 990 base with 150% scaling. It also has a lower than average cooldown at 75 seconds, which makes a bigger difference than you might think. Say you're playing against like an Osiris in solo lane, for example. You can use your ultimate just to force him to use his to dodge it, and then ult him again straight off cooldown and his won't be up yet because it's 90 seconds. And by doing that you can potentially land a lot of damage or even a free kill. Overall, it's just an insanely powerful ability, mainly for team fighting, but even in the lane it can be a powerful kill or anti-gank tool due to the long CC immunity and stun. Alright, so let's round out this section with the ability leveling order. So I'll cover solo first and then support afterwards because it does differ slightly. So for solo, level 1 take Heavenly Reflection for wave clear and poke. Level 2 take Glorious Charge for the extra clear, safety and chase, plus it charges up the mirror as you dash through the wave. Level 3 take a second point in Heavenly Reflection because you really need that extra wave clear and damage. If you're really far behind and need the sustain, you could take Divine Presence here, but most of the time you just want Heavenly Reflection rank 2. Level 4 take either Divine Presence or Heavenly Reflection, the one you didn't take at level 3. And then finally take Dazzling Offensive at level 5. From there, take points in the ult wherever you can and max the 2, then the 1, then the 3. For support, level 1 take Heavenly Reflection, level 2 take Divine Presence. The reason for taking this over the dash is that in support, the aura is affecting 2 of you, not just 1 like in solo, so it's actually really useful to have online early. Level 3 take Glorious Charge, level 4 take a second point in Heavenly Reflection, and then take ult at level 5. And the ability leveling priority is the same as solo. Alright, so now you know Amaterasu's abilities and how they work, let's move on to the items section, where I'll discuss potential item choices for her and conclude with a full build example. So I'll be discussing a few item choices I think are good on her. For those who don't care about that and just want the full build example, skip to the time on screen. Alright, so for Amaterasu, I'm going to be covering mostly solo lane builds and items, but I will touch a bit on her support viability and how her build differs in that role compared to her main role of solo. As far as I know, she's only really viable in those 2 roles at a high level of play. Alright, so starting builds, you're going to want to start it off with a Blessing, of course. For solo lane, this will be Warrior's Blessing, with Guardian's Blessing being the pick for support. Then for solo, you want to start up an early item. Right now, this will be tier 1 boots, so you can easily back early on and finish them for a big power spike, and also buy Chalice of Healing. But it's sometimes viable to rush the start of a defense item in certain metas, for example. Then you want to spend any remaining gold you have on potions for sustain in the lane. If you got tier 1 boots, which I recommend right now, it's probably the best start, you can grab a health chalice as well, as it gives you continued sustain over the entire laning phase, so I would recommend that. For support, right now the meta is to rush upgraded sprint right away, so grab that and then get potions with the remaining gold. However, this might not always be the meta, so other options would be tier 1 boots or tier 1 of an early item such as Gauntlet of Thebes or Sovereignty. But until they change sprint, it's the best option to simply rush that for the haste effect in lane. It's too powerful to pass up. Alright, so with that over with, let's move on to useful item options for Amaterasu. For this, I'll be covering solo lane options first, then I'll touch on support items as well afterwards. And again, if you don't want to listen to my justifications on which items I choose and why I choose them, then skip to the time on screen for the full build examples. So for solo lane, your boots of choice is always Warrior Tabby. The 40 physical power is too powerful to pass up for her. You could maybe argue for Reinforced Greaves, but unless they get some buffs, they're simply outclassed by Warrior Tabby right now. Then after the boots, you'll want a defensive item to tank hits from your opposing solo laner. Against a physical lane opponent, Breastplate of Valor is insanely good for Amaterasu in lane. It provides a bit of mana, which is nice as it allows you to spam abilities a lot, 20% CDR, which once again you can spam abilities a lot and is really important for most ability based warriors. And then of course the physical protections, which gives you defense against the enemy laner, minions and towers, plus maybe the enemy jungler as well if they're physical. If the enemy has both a physical solo and a physical jungler, I would get Breastplate of Valor straight after boots in every single game, no question. If you're against a magical lane opponent, I like Genji's Guard. It's sort of like a magical version of Breastplate of Valor almost, giving CDR, MP5, magical protections and some health as well. The CDR and mana are important for the same reasons I mentioned when covering Breastplate. Genji's also has a nice amount of magical defense, which won't reduce minion or tower damage, but it will help against your lane opponent of course if they are magical. But then it also has that little bit of extra health on it, which gives some protection against physical damage sources like towers, minions and jungle ganks. It's just a well-rounded item similar to Breastplate and should be your go-to against a magical laner unless they're a healer. In which case, Pestilence should be your second item. Where Genji's Guard is usually useful for guardians and burst mages, Pestilence is your best friend against sustained mages or guardians like Aphrodite, Hel, Chang'e or Sylvanas. It provides health and magical defense, which is self-explanatory at this point, and then has the anti-heal passive, which is really important. It makes a difference when trading in lane, and it's also infinitely useful to have that anti-heal for late game teamfights. So after your second item, your build can really go in a bunch of different directions depending on what's giving you trouble in the current match. I'll list a few good items here that can round out the rest of your build, and then go into a full build example afterwards. So if physicals are giving you trouble, there's the aforementioned Breastplate of Valor, Midgardian Mail, and Hide of the Nemean Lion are both good against auto attack characters, though in my opinion Midgardian is the superior version right now. Emperor's Armor is an option if you're having trouble sieging or defending sieges. Usually this is more of a supportive item that supports will usually pick up, but you can grab it if your support doesn't have it. And finally, Void Shield is a more aggressive option that provides a bit more damage at the cost of some defensive stats, but it can certainly be useful to have at least one in your team. In terms of magical defense options, Genji's Guard and Pestilence, of course, as I mentioned before, are really good. Shogun's Kasari is once again similar to Emperor's Armor, more of a support item, but you can certainly grab it as a solo laner if you're on a heavy basic attack focused team. And Sheila is similar to Void Shield, but on the magical side of things. It sacrifices some defensive stats in favour of a little bit more damage, but the passive can certainly be useful against certain gods. I'll quickly mention Bulwark and Oni Hunter's Garb. While they aren't terrible items, they're usually outclassed by other magical defense items such as Pestilence or Genji's Guard for raw defense, so unless you really want their passives, I'd avoid them. And finally, there's the mixed defense items, which consist of the Cloak Tree, Magi's Cloak, Hide of the Urchin, Spirit Robe and Mantle of Discord, and general health items. I would avoid building Magi's Cloak. You really shouldn't need the passive, and overall the stats are fucking terrible on the item, but other than that, Hide, Spirit Robe and Mantle are all useful in different ways and at different stages of the game. Spirit Robe helps you if you're getting really focused by hard CC. Mantle helps if you're getting dived on and bursted down very quickly, and Hide just has really insane stats if you can stack it up. Quick note with Hide of the Urchin though, you gotta get it done fairly early, usually 4th item at the latest to really see good benefits from it, unless you're absolutely stomping every fight. But yeah, you can easily pick up from these 3 items to fit the situation, or even build multiple of them. They're just solid items really to have, and they cover both defenses pretty well, so. And for general health items, Shield of Regrowth is the one that really stands out for Amaterasu in my opinion. Since she can proc its passive very reliably with her 1, and combined with the speed aura, she can be insanely quick. It also provides useful stats in general with a lot of health, some regen and some CDR. Son of Gaia is still marginally useful, but only really against knock-up heavy comps. It's not really a general purpose item like it has been in the past. Wingblade is a nice item to have, but only really against really heavy slow compositions. And finally, Mail of Renewal isn't bad by any means, but it's usually outclassed by other choices. I really don't recommend damage items on solo lane warriors other than boots, especially on Amaterasu since she works better with full CDR and defense to work off her high base damages. You shouldn't really need power as her scalings aren't great, but if you really want some offensive options, my go-tos will be Void Shield as I mentioned before, and Masamune, which gives 50 power but also a little bit of defensive stats as well. Other damage items can work marginally in some situations, but you're better off going full tank and CDR with ammo really. Alright, so let's close off the solo lane section with a full build example before we move on to support Amaterasu. Warrior Tabai, Breastplate or Genji's Guard, Hide of the Urchin, Genji's Guard or Breastplate, whichever one you didn't build second, Mantle of Discord, Midgardian Mail. Naturally, you build Breastplate first against the physical, Genji's Guard first against the magical. Of course, you can change out any of these items to fit the game as I mentioned before, and I recommend doing that, but this build should give you a good foundation until you learn what items are good and you can alter the build to your own tastes. Alright, so let's move on to a little bit about support Amaterasu's viability and what items she makes use of. For your boots, you can go with either Talaria boots or Reinforced Greaves depending on your playstyle and how you like to play her. Personally, I like the mobility from Talaria, so that's my pick, but Reinforced Greaves can certainly be viable in certain situations as well for a more defensive option. You then want to work into a typically aura-based support build. Gauntlet of Thebes, Sovereignty and Heartward are all very core items. It doesn't mean you need all 3 every game, but you can't really go wrong with these choices. Then a lot of the other items I mentioned for solo lane Amaterasu still apply, so I'll just list them here with less of an in-depth explanation because I've already covered them. Shogun's Kasari is nice with the heavy basic attack composition. Emperor's Armor is good for sieging or defending. Midgardian Mail for anti-basic attack comps. Spirit Robe or Mantle of Discord for more personal defense against being focused. Pestilence for anti-heal. Shield of Regrowth for more mobility and some CDR, and finally Winged Blade to deal with slows. Alright, so here's a full build example for support Amaterasu. Talaria boots, Gauntlet of Thebes, Sovereignty, Spirit Robe, Shield of Regrowth, Mantle of Discord. As always, you can change out these items, yada yada, you get the drill at this point. Alright, so finally we'll cover what relics you want on Amaterasu. For For solo lane, teleport is an option if you want like a fallback and an easy way back to lane. Other than that, any useful teamfight relics like Shell, Heavenly Wings, Horrific Emblem, etc. can all be useful. For support, skip the teleport and simply get 2 of these teamfight relics. My favourite 2 right now are Shell and Heavenly Wings. They're just more powerful than other options right now, but others can work. As I mentioned before, in your starting builds, your first relic should almost always be upgraded to Heavenly Wings, like right off the bat for support, and then you can pick up a second relic later. Alright, so moving on to some more general tips and synergies within Amaterasu's kit. Armor's clear is fairly weak in the early game, so making sure you fully utilise the damage from her mirror and also the 10% increase from her passive is essential if you want to compete with other solo laners. It's also good in support as well, as it will boost your ADC's damage to the wave early on as well as yours. Also, utilise her passive as much as you can when doing objectives like Gold Fury and Fire Giant. A 10% damage increase from all sources, as I've mentioned before, is really insane for bursting them down. It's also important to manage the auras effectively. I've talked about this a bit before when we covered her abilities, so I won't spend too long on this. Basically, you want power on as much as possible in laning phases. You only really need speed if you're chasing or running away. Having the bonus power will improve your lane clear and poke immensely, so try and keep it on there as much as you can. Same with your ADC if you're playing a support, so really do try and keep it on there in duo lane especially. Avoid switching auras unless you really need the heal or if you're not fighting the enemy. Same thing applies to objectives. Try and stay on power aura as long as you can until you absolutely need the heal. It'll increase your entire team's damage output by quite a bit, so it's useful to stick on the power aura. Armor's mirror will actually charge up based on each instance of damage dealt or taken. This allows you to boost your clear speed at the cost of dashing through the enemy wave and then firing her mirror. This can be risky as it uses your dash, but as long as you have eyes on the enemy jungler and aren't afraid of dying, it's a good way to stay even or not get pushed to tower quite as much by more aggressive solo laners. I don't really see the need to do this in support as your ADC can clear for you, this is mainly a solo lane tip. While Amaterasu's early game is considerably weaker than her late game, don't underestimate the amount of damage she can actually put out in the early to mid game. If an enemy is getting cocky trying to push you out, don't be afraid to take a fight. Her 2 hits insanely hard once you get 4 or 5 points into it. Not a lot of people expect to take 400 plus damage out of nowhere from an Amma at level 9, so make sure you try and abuse that. Same thing with her ultimate actually. If you can manage to burn someone's jump or dash and land all 3 hits, it hits insanely hard early game combined with her 2. She also has the power bonus auras and the 10% damage from the passive that apply to her as well, so giving her the little extra edge over gods in lanes in terms of boxing can actually be really good. But yeah, overall be prepared to play very defensive, but you can certainly take fights if you need to. Alright, this guide's getting really long, so let's finally round out a little bit with some certain matchups. This segment is a new addition to the god guides that I haven't done before, so let me know if you like it or if I should cut it out to try and make the guides a bit shorter and easier to watch. So let's kick it off with a couple good matchups for Amma in solo lane. I won't be covering support matchups as it's not really as relevant in support and I want to try and keep this section fairly short, so we'll just be covering solo for now. Alright, so starting it off, Guan Yu is a pretty decent matchup for Amaterasu in general. It's a fairly passive matchup. You lose clear for the first couple of levels, but once you get some points into the mirror you can usually clear faster than Guan Yu due to the long channel time on his Talu assault. Speaking of, you can easily silence that ability as well if you need to with your dash, but don't get too greedy with it as he might try and bait you into a jungle gank. Also, his Talu assault does a lot of tick damage and will easily charge your mirror up very quickly, which can be useful in boxing situations or for clear. You both have good sustain and max your heal seconds, so it's usually not a kill lane type of matchup unless one of you gets very fed. Both of you are just looking to get to late game really. Both of you can also counter ult each other, so make sure you're using yours wisely to try and counter his. Any matchup where Amaterasu can go even or get to late game is generally a good matchup for her, but you've got to watch out as Guan Yu's goal is also just to get to late game where he shines in teamfights. Bellona is not necessarily an easy matchup, but as long as you know what you're doing, Amma fares better than a lot of other solo laners might. She'll obviously outclear you, so until around level 7 just focus on the wave pretty much entirely. My general strategy is to just stay in power stance as much as possible and abuse the mirror for its high damage, then back off, rinse and repeat. The key to beating Bellona is not getting into an auto attack fight with her. She will win 100% of the time if she starts using shield bash effectively against you. Though if she's trying to box you with the hammer or something early game, then feel free to take a trade. You might get a bit of extra poke, since you can sustain up through the 1 while Bellona's sustain is a little harder to use. And then once you're out of the laning phase, Amma's teamfight is mostly superior to Bellona's. A coordinated team that can fully utilise Bellona's flag will benefit a lot from it, but most of the time it's not used to its full potential and Amaterasu wins out in teamfights. And in terms of weaker matchups, anything that has a strong early game presence and can outclear Amma in lane will be a tough matchup. Tia has a great early game and can also interrupt your 2 at the right time with Fearless and cause you to miss the wave with it. The way to beat Tia generally is to invade his blue whenever possible as he has real mana issues early on, and then just to survive till late game because his teamfight is really weak in comparison to Amaterasu's. Kukulkan can be a rough matchup. The built-in anti-heal can hurt you in terms of sustain, which Amaterasu relies on a lot in the laning phase. He clears fairly well, but honestly not that much better than Amma until he goes berserk. Naturally, the way to beat Kuchu is just not let him go berserk in the first place, but obviously you can't always do that. So if he does get it off, just back up and let him do his thing for the duration of it and then push back up once it expires. Blue buff invades are naturally weak against him since he doesn't use the mana, so it can be hard to shut him down, so just try and play safe, and as per usual, your team fight is way better come late game. And finally, Hercules is yet another early game lane bully that Amaterasu struggles against. He has really insane base damage his early game and will be looking to kill you pretty much from minute 1. So just try and play this one very passive if he has driving strike up, and try and avoid being like pulled into tower or baited into ganks, etc. Aim to just clear and secure your blue when you can. Your late game teamfight presence is obviously way better due to your ultimate. His has no CC and yours has tons of CC, so you're good there. In a lot of these bad early game matchups, you'll want to like seriously consider getting teleport as your first relic. This gives you a free back if you make a mistake and get caught out, which can be useful. With all of these quote unquote bad matchups though, none of them are unwinnable. If the enemy succumbs to their hubris and starts playing way too aggressive, you can like try and go for a punish kill or even get a jungle gank on them. Honestly, if Amaterasu wins lane against any of these bad matchups, the game's pretty much over. But anyway, that's about it for the guide. Hope you guys learned something new about Amaterasu and enjoyed the video. Once again, let me know if you like this slightly longer version, or if you prefer I kept them shorter like I've been doing and more brief. Don't forget to leave a like and share the video around if it helps you out, and subscribe for more guides in the future on the channel. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out, nerds.